Hey, History 205 guys. Hope you're doing well and having a good week. I wanted to make a quick video to cover some things that we didn't get to talk about in class on Wednesday. Time got away from us, but again, I think it was a really productive time as well. One of the things I wanted to kind of offer some more clarity on, expand on a little bit, is evaluation of secondary sources, which you're doing for your exercise for your challenge, one of your challenges for this week. Just in the early ones that I've seen coming in, uh, I think in looking at those answers and looking at responses, there's some things where I've realized maybe I should have spent a little more time talking about some of the nuances in terms of evaluating sources and thinking about differentiating between quality, secondary, and primary sources, right? We briefly talked about this idea that, of course, as we're familiar with, there are primary sources out there created as part of the event itself. Then there are these sort of secondary sources, which are interpretations and analysis of the event. And there's this third level called tertiary sources. So tertiary sources are essentially secondary sources, but they're really compilations of secondary sources. They're built almost entirely on secondary sources. You can think about tertiary as a term for sources that aren't really appropriate for academic research. I have put in D2L, and we'll hand out in class on Friday. This guide, I found this online from, I didn't create it, someone else. This guy's name is literally Mark Brilliant, which is, you know, just awesome. Um, but I like some of the distinctions this guide makes between secondary and tertiary sources, right? So when he talks about secondary sources, he means, in terms of academic quality, books and articles produced by historians. It's a piece of historical writing anchored in primary sources and informed by secondary sources. They're not simply chronologies of historical evidence, i.e., names, dates, places, events from the past. And this is particularly important. Rather, they are arguments and interpretations about the past that emerge from an immersion in a foundation of historical evidence, right? So, and that part's really important as you're going through uh, looking at the sources for your challenge this week. I'm seeing some people that maybe aren't thinking enough about that arguments and interpretations piece. Is the person analyzing the event, or are they just sort of chronicling it, or is it just a sort of compilation of information? And Then he talks about tertiary sources that they're usually synthetic. They're based on the research of others, or they're not. The other thing I would just say is they're not are really offering arguments and interpretations about the past, right? They are just they're just sort of telling the story, or they just contain data, right? So when we're thinking about so classic examples of tertiary sources would be encyclopedias, right? Guidebooks, sort of popular like coffee table type books, right? Or digests or textbooks, right? Those are not appropriate for academic research. They might point you to some other sources that you want to look at, but they're not really sources you would want to use, right? And so that gets me to some of the distinctions or some things I want. And again, this is really me realizing I should have clarified some of these more. So don't feel badly if you've misunderstood some of this. So one of the things that I'm seeing is that some of you are looking at some of the samples in the exercise or in the challenge, and you're saying, "Oh yeah, okay, well it has primary sources in it, so it's appropriate for academic scholarship, right? So it's good because it has primary sources." And this is kind of like one of those like SAT logic problems, right? Where you know, um, all dogs are mammals, but not all mammals are dogs, right? Sort of categorization. So all good historical scholarship uses lots of primary sources, but just because something has primary sources in it, it doesn't mean that it's good scholarship, right? So not all work that uses, and I'll put that in parentheses or quotation marks, not all work that uses primary sources is necessarily academic quality scholarship. So we talked before about David Barton and his misguided and you know horrifically inaccurate uh, use of sources, right? But there are primary sources in there, but it's not good history, right? The you know this sort of propaganda history, like facts the historians leave out, which is a book I found a long time ago. That's basically all the information in there is correct in that there are facts, there are primary sources, but they're used in these very selective ways to promote propaganda, right? To sort of defend the Confederacy. Um, Even things like Holocaust denials, right? They look official, right? They look like they are using primary sources, but they're crap, right? So just because something has primary sources in it doesn't mean that it's automatically worth using or appropriate for academic research. So again, all this is about evaluating all of your sources holistically, right? There's no like one like on off switch, right? That will automatically make a source bad or necessarily automatically make it good, right? The other thing I wanted to say, and maybe you can say, well, if something's published by a university press, an academic press, that automatically makes it suitable, and that may be the case where you get the closest to having a sort of automatic, uh, you know, signal that this is appropriate. But one of the things I did want to make a distinction about here is that we talked in class about academic publishers. So those would be almost any publisher that has university press in its name, right? That those are almost entirely academic. They're appropriate for academic research, right? They've been peer reviewed. We talked about that. They, are checked for their scholarship. They have high standards for the level of research and expertise that their authors bring to their books. But then there are also academic quality sources that would be appropriate for use in academic research that are published by other presses, right? So here I tried to make a little Venn diagram, right? So all books published by academic presses for the most part are appropriate for research. But there are academic quality sources also published by other publishers. So, and these are what are called trade publishers, HarperCollins, Macmillan, Penguin, Random House. Those are kind of the most known. I mean, there are hundreds of publishers out there, right? So, again, it's kind of, if it is an academic press, that is a signal right away that you can pretty much rely on it. But just because it's not an academic press doesn't mean that you automatically eliminate it, right? So you have to then look at some of the other characteristics. So just like historians are always evaluating, um, events from the past and weighing different factors and trying to assess the quality, you have to do the same with secondary sources. So those are just two kind of common assumptions that I wanted to clarify, right? So to review again, um, first of all, watch out for these kind of tertiary sources, right? They may include they may include primary sources. They may list them. They may have data in there that's a primary source. But what we're really looking for in appropriate secondary sources is that they're not simply collections of historical evidence, but they're arguments, right? They're interpretations. They're offering an analysis. Um, but they're built upon a foundation of historical evidence, right? So look at that. Try to make that distinction a little more as you look at the sources and decide whether or not they're suitable for academic research. I hope that helps clarify some issues that I'm seeing early on. Most of you are doing fine, and some of your struggles are understandable and not uncommon at all. So I mean, this is a complicated skill. It will get easier, as I said to a student in class yesterday. You know, the more that you practice this and get a sense for what an academic, appropriate academic secondary source looks like, you kind of get this sense of it, and you're able to assess them much quicker. So if you're discouraged, don't be discouraged. It's this is a skill you're learning, right? This is why you're a student, and this is something that you will build and have in your toolbox for the rest of your academic career, and hopefully afterwards. So if you have questions about anything in this video you want to ask me, feel free to do so. I'm always available. Thanks.